The first page was misfiled, slotted behind a mining ordinance dispute from 1958. That's how it slipped through. A yellowed, brittle page, typewritten, with just a few signatures scrawled in smeared blue ink. It shouldn't have been there. It shouldn't have been anywhere. But the deposition was real. Stamped, dated, filed under clergy trespass, suspicious remains. The ink reads, August 3rd, 1965. Clay County, Kentucky. It was Deputy Thomas Renner who led the team up to the chapel home that summer, a structure long since reclaimed by thickets and vine-choked paths, perched high on Allegheny Ridge like a forgotten tooth. The house had no recorded purchase deed, no tax filings past 1947, but it existed. Locals knew to stay clear of it, not because of what had happened, but because of what had never stopped. According to the deposition, the air inside the Hollingsworth property was cold despite the heat. 8 skeletal bodies were found beneath the floorboards in a circle formation, some adult-sized, some child-sized. Their arms were outstretched, palms upward, as if receiving something. Strips of sheet music, stained, curled at the edges, were clenched between their teeth. One skeleton, roughly the size of a 6-year-old, was missing vocal cords entirely. Instead, nestled in the chest cavity where the heart should have been, was a rosary carved from small jawbone fragments. There were no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, no blood, no attempt at burial, just silence. When asked why the case had never been made public, the sheriff at the time, Everett Glynn, cited cultural sensitivity. The files were sealed. Later requests under the Freedom of Information Act yielded nothing. The file was listed as missing or destroyed, and yet, there it was, tucked away, half-folded behind pages about road development along Harlan Pike. The last known mention of the Hollingsworth name before the 1965 discovery was in a Clay County school ledger dated October 12, 1948. A teacher had noted, "Children sing before lunch, all of them except Hollingsworth girl. Stares out window, mouths something, no sound." That girl, listed only as Elba Hollingsworth, was marked absent for the remainder of the year. There is no death record, no transfer, only a note from the school nurse. Whispers hymns to walls, draws trees with mouths. There were whispers about the family long before that. Locals said the Hollingsworths were kind, if a little odd, known for their musical gifts. They taught themselves to harmonize in thirds and fourths, an ancient Appalachian choral style usually reserved for sacred dirges and deathbed songs. Neighbors described their evening rituals as eerie but beautiful. One woman, Doris Minter, remembered in a 1977 oral history interview, "You could hear 'em from across the holler. Just voices, no instruments, same songs over and over, always around twilight. Then one day, nothing. No funerals were ever held. No grave sites ever marked." The Hollingsworth chapel home remained on the ridge, slowly swallowed by brush and silence. And then came 1965, and the file. An attached image, faded and grainy, shows the skeletal arrangement. The resolution too poor to make out facial features, but clear enough to see the configuration. Palms to the sky, teeth bared, and something dark on the tongue. Ink, perhaps. Or wax. One of the responding deputies, Chet Linwood, submitted an unsigned statement 2 weeks later, which was never entered into official records but appears alongside the deposition. "I swear the trees were humming when we left. Thought it was wind at first, but it wasn't moving the leaves." Linwood died 6 months later in a hunting accident. His son would later claim his father never went back into the woods again after that call. Not once. There was a psychiatric file, too, dated January 9, 1971, from the Preston State Mental Hospital. A patient named Abram Hollingsworth, age listed as approximately 64, admitted after being found near the closed Hollingsworth Chapel. He was mute for 6 months. Then one night, according to the night nurse's log, he sat up in bed and said, "They sang on the day they left, and the trees sang back." That was all. he never spoke again. He died in 1973. No known relatives claimed the body. The sheet music found in the mouths of the remains was preserved by one archivist at the University of Kentucky. According to her notes, it was written in a form of shape note notation, a 19th century Southern musical tradition used by primitive Baptists and obscure rural sects. But this version was altered. Chords progressed backward. Time signatures changed mid-measure. And lyrics, in Latin, English, and what was believed to be a corrupted form of ancient hymn dialect, referenced the mouthless choir, the rootless praise, and a figure called Cassian Vale. None of these terms appear in any known hymnals. When the archivist attempted to reconstruct the melody on piano, she reported nausea and severe vertigo. Her report states simply, "This music is not written to be played, it is written to be remembered." She never attempted a second transcription. The Hollingsworth land is still marked on certain pre-1970 county maps, a small dot on a ridge above the confluence of Larkspur Creek and Benner's Hollow. Since the 1965 discovery, the structure has collapsed or been erased. Locals say the road leading to it washed out in a flood, but there are no records of any such weather event. In fact, satellite surveys from the past decade show no remnants of any building on the ridge. Just pine, ash, and uneven patches of mossy ground that seem to rise and fall with no pattern. To this day, no birds nest in the trees surrounding that ridge. No deer cross it. Hunters avoid it. "Bad echoes," one man said in a 1999 field report. "Sound don't bounce. Right up there." The Clay County Historical Society never acknowledged the family in any regional documentation. Even obituaries from the 1950s omit them entirely. It's as if the family, their home, their songs, their end, were written out, not just of memory, but of geography. And yet, if you walk far enough up the old trail where the house once stood, you may still hear something, faint, like a choir buried in dirt, a melody you can't place, but feel in your chest. This story is not about ghosts. It's about erasure. A family that sang their faith into the earth and disappeared without a scream, without a trace. Only a harmony left behind that the wind still carries, if you're quiet enough to hear it. If the name Hollingsworth appears on your birth certificate, if your grandfather ever warned you not to follow singing past the tree line, if you've ever dreamed of voices that don't breathe but somehow echo, tell us, type it below, before they erase this too, and subscribe, because some voices return when no one's listening. To understand what happened to the Hollingsworths, you have to first understand where they lived, not just geographically, but spiritually. Clay County, Kentucky, has always been the sort of place where the roads seem to change direction once you're deep enough in, where signs rot off their posts, where creeks cut sharper with every generation, and where memory clings harder than moss to wood. Nestled deep in the folds of the Appalachian Mountains, the town that once brushed against Allegheny Ridge was marked on early maps as Marrowbone Crossing. Today, it appears on no maps at all. In 1924, a proposed railway line was meant to cut through Clay County and join Harlan to the Tennessee border. It was never finished. The government's last documented survey in 1926 lists a note scribbled in the margin. Terrain unstable, locals uncooperative, spirits unwilling. Whether spirits meant alcohol or something older has never been confirmed, but either way, the project died, and with it, so did the town's future. The coal vein that had sustained the area, the Benner Seam, was declared uneconomical by 1931. The mine was shuttered. With it went the jobs, the church funding, the schoolhouse repairs. What remained was a skeletal framework of a township crumbling into hollers and ridges, a place left behind, and, in time, left off the record. An archived letter from the Department of Economic Development dated July 12, 1953, describes Clay County as an area in moral and material recession, exhibiting high rates of illiteracy, religious radicalism, and property abandonment. The report was never made public. The town center, such as it was, had no real name. Locals called it Crossing Hollow, though no one could recall what it was meant to cross. 3 churches stood within a 5-mile radius in the early 1900s. All primitive Baptist, all built from pine. All gone by 1960. One was destroyed by fire. The others simply fell apart. What remains are stone foundations overtaken by vines and wild ginseng. On certain days, fragments of hymnal pages still drift down from the attic beams, though no paper has been stored there for decades. A now-defunct Clay County school ledger from 1949 reveals an unsettling anomaly. Of the 73 students listed for the fall semester, 12 shared no last name. They were simply marked as H. One of the teachers, Ida Reese, made a notation in red beside their names. Sings harmony, will not recite alone, fails to answer to roll, but hums. The 12 children were all withdrawn by December. There are no further records of their education, no transfers, no truancy cases. Their addresses were listed only as Ridge. The deeper one looks into the infrastructure of this town, the more it collapses. Property deeds stop mid-line. Tax records vanish during critical years. Road names change with no explanation. Ridge Road becomes Larkspur Hollow becomes Number 9 Trail. Even the cemetery registers are flawed. Between 1930 and 1950, 22 individuals were buried without markers. County notes read only, "Unconfirmed resident. No known kin." It's not that the town was forgotten. It's that it was unrecorded, erased in slow motion. The people who remained lived by candlelight well into the 1960s, not because they lacked electricity, but because, as one former resident put it in a 1983 oral history project, "Some light don't belong in certain places, makes the dead want to talk again." That man, Vernon Millsap, claimed he helped build the Hollingsworth Chapel home when he was 19. He was never paid. He said the wood came from trees that bled when you cut them. It wasn't right, he told the recorder. You'd hear them humming while you worked. You'd stop hammering, and it'd stop. Then it'd start again soon as your back was turned. He died in 1985, hit by a logging truck on a road that hadn't been in service since 1972. The coroner's note mentioned he was walking barefoot, muttering lyrics with no recognizable melody. Old maps drawn by the WPA in the 1930s show small, faint X's along the ridgeline, where the Hollingsworth land was believed to stretch. These were labeled informal gatherings. Later hand-drawn annotations cross out the word informal and replace it with ceremonial. No records explain who amended the map. There was one road, Hollow Trail, that led directly to the chapel home, but in 1965 it was closed following what county reports described as erosion collapse. A photo from the time shows no erosion, just a tree that had fallen, splitting the trail like an open book. The road was never cleared. No alternate route was proposed. It was as if the town decided that particular path no longer needed to exist. The post office in Clay County officially stopped, delivering to the Ridge in 1954. The final letter logged to the Hollingsworth residents was never opened. It remains sealed, archived in the county clerk's basement, and is marked with only one word: refused. By the time the 1965 investigation occurred, no official resident claimed to have known the Hollingsworth family. Yet folklore collected in 1978 by researcher Emmett Rowland tells a different story. Dozens of aging residents remembered the Singing Ridge. One woman, Clarice Penner, recalled as a child how her mother warned her to stay in after sundown, or you'll join the chorus. Another man remembered seeing figures standing in the fog at the tree line, all facing the same direction, swaying without sound. But no one would speak of the Hollingsworths by name, not directly. The closest was a whisper. Those that hum the dark open the door again. There were no birth announcements, no obituaries, just a place where people once were and then weren't. A ghost town not of buildings, but of memory itself. The kind of forgetting that feels intentional, as though the town agreed, in silence and in fear, that this part of their history did not belong to them anymore. To this day, the land where the Hollingsworths lived is marked only by a sudden dip in elevation and the sound of water running underground, though no spring has ever been found. Hikers who pass through the area report headaches, nosebleeds, or, most frequently, the sensation that someone is humming just behind them, too low to make out the tune. No matter how far they walk, it never fades. When you search for the Hollingsworth name in the Clay County census records, there's a blank. Not a missing entry. A deliberate, physical space. A skip between the Hollander family of 1918 and the Holter family of 1919. The microfilm reels twist and click, but the line that should hold the Hollingsworths is simply not there. As if someone knew precisely where they were, and then decided no one else ever should. But fragments remain, not in the traditional archives, but in what Appalachia keeps tucked under the floorboards. In water-stained hymnals, stitched quilt squares, unsent letters, and first names passed down like warnings. You don't find the Hollingsworth lineage by looking at family trees. You find it by listening to the gaps in oral history, where someone goes still mid-sentence, where someone suddenly says, "We don't talk about that side." The earliest recorded trace of the family appears in a Harlan County land ledger dated June 17, 1886. A plot listed as unsuitable for plow, ideal for seclusion, was transferred to one Alden R. Hollingsworth for a sum of $6 and a promise to maintain a worship structure. The deed includes no co-signers, no banking seal, and no address. But it's notarized, in ink that has turned a bluish rust. Between 1886 and 1930, the name Hollingsworth appears exactly 7 times in official documentation across Clay and adjoining counties. Once for a marriage license. Bride listed as Mercy Elaine Dorr, age 15. Once for the death of a child named Enoch. Cause, insufficient breath. Once in a dispute over water rights with the Ellery family, resolved quietly, with no court proceedings. The remaining 4 entries are vague. Church minutes, a property tax dispute, a census revision, and a note in a sheriff's incident log reading, "Holler singing, same as last winter, likely the Hollingsworths." What's chilling is not how little exists, but how precisely the fragments avoid coherence. There are no clusters, no timelines, just droplets of presence, like a whisper forced to scatter every time you try to name it. Old Bibles sometimes carry more than just scripture. In one recovered from a collapsed home near Benner's Hollow, a 1902 King James with cracked leather and pages so brittle they flake, a family tree is hand-drawn in faded ink. Most names are crossed out, except one. At the base, Cassian H., with a date that reads, "Born before." Family researchers today often overlook the Hollingsworths entirely. When pressed, genealogy forums list them as a diminished branch, a lost surname, or, more commonly, a disputed lineage. And yet oral reports persist. A nurse's aide at the Manchester Sanitarium claimed in a 1989 interview that her great-uncle was a Hollingsworth. She remembered being warned never to sleep with both ears uncovered, or you might hear the song they sing to bring you back. When asked to provide a birth certificate, she said she had none. They weren't birthed, just remembered. The interview ended when she began humming softly under her breath and refused to stop. There are no photographs, none that survive. But in 1962, a folklorist named Trevor Ellsworth, collecting music traditions across eastern Kentucky, took a photo of a group of children at a remote revival meeting near Ridge Hollow. The picture was never published. He claimed, in a letter to his wife, that the children in the back row were wrong. Too still, too old in the eyes, they weren't singing to us, they were singing through us. That roll of film was never developed. His note stopped shortly after, yet the community knew the name. Quietly, cautiously. An audio transcript from a 1957 town council meeting, preserved in the attic of the Harlan County Courthouse, includes this exchange. Chairman: Any concerns about the Ridge folk? Resident: Which ridge? Chairman: The Hollingsworth Ridge. Resident: Silence. Chairman: Not the name then. Resident: Not in open daylight. The recording ends with a hum, a low tone, static, then a snap, like a hand closing over the mic. People remembered the family by what they didn't do. They didn't baptize their children. They didn't bury their dead in public cemeteries. They didn't host weddings, and no one ever recalled a Hollingsworth funeral. Their rituals, if they had any, happened at night, inside, behind shutters, with no bell to call others in. And still, they were known, deeply, uncomfortably. Field journals from missionary Eula Jane Collins, dated between 1935 and 1942, describe a recurring dream she had during her time near Allegheny Ridge. In it, she hears a melody coming from the woods, walks toward it, and finds a wooden house with no windows. Inside, a family stands in a circle, holding hands, humming in unison. None of them open their mouths. One child holds a jar of teeth. On the porch sits a man in a preacher's collar, scribbling notes on the wind. In her waking journal she wrote, "The family from my dream matches the Hollingsworths by name and number, but I've never seen them in person, and no one will admit they have." By the late 1940s, reports of the family became rarer. Sheriff dispatch records from 1947 and 1948 show 2 calls from Larkspur Hollow about choral disturbances, both notated with the shorthand SSV, short for same song, verified. No response teams were dispatched. The notes end with a single line, "Advise silence." Then came the gap. From 1949 to 1965, nothing, not even rumor. It's as if the family agreed to disappear. Some believe they were victims of a town's hatred, of government suppression, or of something older still. Others claim they were never meant to last, that they belonged to a lineage whose rituals outgrew the world, whose voices were meant not for the living, but for something beneath. But a final trace lingers. In a parcel delivery ledger from 1952, an unsigned package was marked "Returned to Sender," with the intended recipient listed as Caretaker, House of the Hollow Hymn. The delivery address matched the path to the Hollingsworth Chapel home. No such house is officially listed on any record. The package's contents remain unknown. The note attached was written in red chalk and simply read, "You forgot the child." You can tell the difference between religion and ritual by the sound it makes when no one's watching. Religion echoes, in pews, pulpits, organ pipes. It echoes because it's meant to be heard. But ritual hums. Ritual is made for silence, for the forgotten dark, for places where no one should listen but someone always does. And in the case of the Hollingsworths, what echoed above ground was nothing compared to what hummed beneath it. The house they built near Allegheny Ridge was often referred to in later interviews as the chapel, though no official records list it as a religious structure. But its floor plan told a different story. A central room with 7 evenly spaced wooden chairs, no table, a narrow hallway with fading symbols etched into the plaster, and a cellar door hidden beneath a woven rug that, according to the 1965 deposition, smelled of beeswax and iron. It's what was found below that matters. During the suppressed investigation that unearthed the remains beneath the floorboards, deputies reported a second basement, a sub-cellar with no stairs leading down, only a rope ladder soaked through with age. The room was circular, unlike the square structure above. Carved directly into the dirt were grooves in spiraling patterns, wide enough to walk but narrow enough that stepping outside them felt wrong. On the wall was a shelf, and on the shelf, 1 bound book, 12 candle stubs, and a glass jar containing 4 preserved vocal cords, labeled with initials matching those from the town's 1940s school roster. But the centerpiece was the book. Recovered by archivist Henry Stroh in 1966 and now stored in a sealed collection at the University of Louisville, The volume was bound in stitched hide and covered in scorched musical notations. Its title, Canticle of the Hollow Choir. The language inside veers between Latin, phonetic English, and what linguistic scholars have called a Proto-Appalachian glossolalia, essentially sacred gibberish passed through generations. Each page pairs a song with an action: kneeling, humming, breathing patterns, silence intervals. These weren't hymns for celebration, they were invocations. And most unsettling of all, some songs weren't meant to be sung aloud, but breathed in unison like a shared exhale. The marginalia, believed to be written by Cassian H., the same name appearing in property deeds and hymnals across counties, includes corrections like, "Do not sing this with mirrors nearby," and "If the child answers back, close the mouth." Only a portion of the book has ever been translated. Page 46 describes a rite titled The 13th Echo, which involves the humming of a sustained note until the body forgets it's making sound. One of the translators, Dr. Eileen Walker, later withdrew her name from the research and left a final note in the archive. It is not music, it's instruction. But the Hollingsworths didn't just write their beliefs, they practiced them. Not publicly, never in town, but inside the family itself, generation to generation, mouth to ear. A 1943 confession from a former housemaid, Alma Greaves, recovered in a police archive from Jackson County, details her time with the family. At sundown, the children gather in a circle. They hold hands. No one speaks. The mother, Mercy, I believe, stands behind them and begins to hum. Not a song, not really. A pattern. It goes around like water in a drain. And then the child in the center opens their mouth, and nothing comes out. But the walls vibrate. It goes on like that for what feels like hours. She later added, "They said when babies are born without a scream, they're closer to God." But it didn't feel holy. It felt like something was listening through the floor. Alma fled the household after 6 months. Her confession was never acted upon. Her file was marked religious dispute, non-criminal. Many of the town's elders interviewed in the 1980s admitted that while no one spoke directly of Hollingsworth worship, they all knew of the silence rule. If you passed the ridge and heard music, you were to keep walking. If a child repeated a phrase in their sleep, you were to break the sentence before it finished. If you found a folded scrap of music in your home, always burn it. Never play it. One of the few surviving examples of a Hollingsworth melody comes from a 1955 recording made by an anonymous folklorist. Stored under the name Appalachian Dissonant Choir Fragment, it is a 12-second audio clip of layered humming. At first, it sounds benign, a few simple overlapping tones, but as it continues, the pitch begins to sway, not rise or fall, but bend, like the sound is remembering itself too early. Many listeners report headaches. Some claim they hear breathing behind the notes. One listener, a minister from Tennessee, burned the tape after 3 seconds and refused to explain why. A medical record from 1961, that of child patient J.E.H., describes a case of non-trauma-induced aphonia, loss of voice, following exposure to communal whisper hymns in the woods behind her house. Her mother claimed the girl had stumbled onto a sunrise service near Ridge Hollow. When questioned, she refused to say more, except they sang her quiet. That's how they do it. The beliefs of the Hollingsworth clan weren't rooted in traditional Christian dogma. At best, they were a mutation. At worst, something older wearing the skin of Southern faith. Their doctrine favored quiet. Silence was reverence. Harmony, a form of submission. Dissonance, sin. One phrase appeared repeatedly in their writings, carved into door frames and etched into stones. The choir without mouths sings loudest. Interpretations vary. Some believe it's a metaphor for inner purity. Others say it's literal, that they believe the soul could sing louder when the flesh stopped trying. Even the way they raised their children reflected this theology. A diary excerpt from Eula Jane Collins, missionary and field teacher, describes visiting the family once, uninvited, in 1940. The child greeted me at the door, hands clasped, head tilted. She never blinked. I asked her if her mother was home. She opened her mouth wide, and I swear to God I heard a sound come from the walls, not her, like she was a funnel. I left a Bible and left. I never walked that trail again. And yet, for all its strangeness, there's something deeply human about ritual. Even the darkest ones are often born from a need to control what's unknown, to protect what's fragile. Perhaps the Hollingsworths believed that their music kept something away, or worse, that it kept something here. The truth is, we don't know what they worshipped, but we know they worshiped together, and whatever they called upon it through sound, then silenced themselves forever. In Appalachian history, the most disturbing events rarely begin with violence. They begin with confusion, with something slightly off, a smell, a drawing, a sound you can't place. And when the outside world finally notices, it's already too late. The damage isn't in what's seen, it's in what's been allowed to grow, unspoken, for decades. For the Hollingsworths, that moment came in 1962, but the seed was planted far earlier. The first public trace came not from a police file or religious dispute, but from a postal complaint. On April 19, 1962, the Clay County postmaster filed a formal grievance regarding repeat redirections and suspicious markings on parcels routed to an unlisted address off Ridge Hollow Trail. The address was a hollow log, literally, a hand-carved wooden pipe buried partway in moss, with a slot wide enough for a folded letter. Carriers called it the choir box. Inside, they found a stack of returned mail, all addressed in identical cursive, and all bearing the same message stamped on the back. Not heard, not home, not present, not refused, just not heard. The postmaster's report was dismissed by county officials as a prank, but it wouldn't be the last time the choir box appeared in official records. A few months later, in October 1962, a Manchester elementary school teacher named Myra Guffin submitted a troubling incident report to the Board of Education. One of her students, Ruthie Maybell, age 8, had turned in a drawing during art time. It depicted her family inside a house, mouths open, eyes closed, and above them, a massive black shape hovering near the ceiling with what looked like organ pipes stretching into their throats. One caption was scribbled beneath, "When we sing right, the ceiling listens." When questioned, Ruthie said the drawing was from a dream she had after visiting the Whisper Church, up in the trees. Her parents denied any such visit. Ruthie never spoke again, not a word, not even to her siblings. Her records list her as suffering from selective trauma-induced aphasia. She was later moved out of state. That same winter, a traveling insurance adjuster from Lexington, Boyd Trenton, found himself stranded after a rock slide blocked the county road. According to his handwritten notes, recovered posthumously from a roadside motel desk drawer, he sought shelter at what he described as an isolated dwelling set back behind a grove of humming trees. His entry reads, "The family was polite. Too polite. No one said a word. I mean that literally. They welcomed me in with gestures and smiles, but not one spoke. They fed me. Cornbread and something bitter in a clay bowl. There were candles, not electric. I stayed the night. Around midnight, I awoke to music, though no one seemed awake. The walls vibrated. The hymn didn't have lyrics, just pressure. Like the sound was climbing down into my bones. I left before sunrise. They didn't stop me. They just watched me go, swaying." He was found dead 3 weeks later in his motel bathtub. No drugs, no wounds. The coroner listed his death as extreme nervous system shock. What does that even mean? But the most public break in the Hollingsworth silence came in March 1963, when 2 hikers reported what they believed to be a mass burial near Larkspur Creek. They had followed a strange low tone deeper into the woods than they intended, and found a moss-covered mound with 12 wooden crosses stuck into the ground, each bearing a different phrase. One read, "Fought the note." Another, "Listen back." The sheriff's office dispatched a team. By the time they arrived, there was no mound, no crosses, just a clearing where no grass grew and the trees leaned slightly inward. When the hikers were re-interviewed, their stories had changed, not slightly, entirely. One claimed she'd never been to the woods. The other insisted they were looking for mushrooms. That same week, the county clerk's office received a folded piece of music in the mail, unsigned, no envelope, no postage. Just a melody handwritten in red ink. It was titled, "Funeral for the Living." The melody contained impossible notations, glissandos between breath marks, rests where vocal cords shouldn't rest. Music designed for something that didn't need lungs. Sheriff Everett Glynn reportedly brought the sheet to a pastor, then to a local choir director, then locked it in the station safe. It was never seen again. Then came the fire. On April 1st, 1963, the Clay County Records Annex, a one-room wooden building housing a century's worth of property deeds and incident logs, burned to the ground in under 12 minutes. Fire marshals called it freakishly clean. No burn spread, no wind. Just the building, and only that building. The only document recovered, found half-charred on the front steps, was an old case report from 1949. Its subject line read, "Hollingsworth disturbance, song dispute." The document's lower half was destroyed, but scribbled across the top in graphite, nearly invisible. They weren't singing to him. They were singing to it. The Hollingsworths were never charged with a crime. They were never arrested. There are no mugshots, no court dates, just ripples, drawings, witnesses who vanish or lose their voices, files that burn, and every once in a while, a fragment that escapes the fire and tells us what we were never meant to know. One such fragment comes from a 1964 psychiatric report from Preston State Hospital, filed by Dr. Calvin Woodrow. It describes a patient found walking barefoot down Hollow Trail, humming a repetitive phrase. She was non-responsive to verbal commands, but reacted only when the radio in the intake office played, static between stations. The doctor's note reads, "Subject began to weep when static resolved into a brief tonal pattern. 3 notes, rising, one held, then silence. She mouthed the words, 'It's calling us back.'" The patient's name was Sarah Elba. She was 14. Her family claimed she had been dead for a year. They had a death certificate, a grave, a funeral notice clipped from the paper. No one could explain how she'd returned. Her file was flagged for federal review. It vanished in transit. To this day, Sarah Elba is listed in some state files as deceased, in others as missing, and in one, handwritten in the margin of an intake form, as rehearsing. The event wasn't one moment. It was a series of fractures, little warnings, each ignored, each recorded, each lost, and through them all the same thing hums beneath the story. A tone we weren't meant to hear. A music that, once it reaches your ears, you don't forget. Even if no one believes you heard it, there's always one. One person who sees something they shouldn't, or remembers something they were raised to forget. A witness, not because they asked to be, but because something, in a flicker of sound or the weight of silence, chose them. The Hollingsworth story has many fragments, but it has only one confirmed witness who survived, for a time. His name was Caleb Wren Hollingsworth, born, possibly, in 1909. His birth was never registered, but his commitment was. On July 17, 1969, he was admitted to Preston State Psychiatric Hospital under emergency custody. The notes from the intake session describe him as malnourished, nonverbal, and covered in what was described as scripture patterns. Not tattoos, not scars, but layers of musical staves carved lightly into the skin, as if traced with a dull needle. Each line was unfinished, interrupted, stopped just before the bar could close. He had been found walking along number 9 trail, roughly 2 miles from the site of the old Hollingsworth chapel home. The trail had long since overgrown, choked by bramble and silent growth. His eyes were unfocused. His lips were moving, but there was no sound. The attending officer, Deputy Harold Breen, wrote in his log, "Patient exhibits rhythmic jaw motion, like he's chewing a song." When nurses tried to clean his wounds, he hissed, not in pain, but in harmony. He began humming in thirds with the nurse's hand pressure. The humming grew louder when his arms were restrained. For 17 days, Caleb didn't speak. He didn't eat unless the food was placed in a precise circle on the tray. He refused to sleep lying down. He wept whenever music played in the building, even distant radio jingles from other rooms, and he never ever closed his eyes completely. Staff described his behavior as ritualistic, responsive only to tonal cues, and uncanny in how precisely he moved to sound. Then, on August 3, 1969, exactly 4 years after, the skeletal remains were found beneath the Hollingsworth house. Caleb spoke. It was 3:14 a.m., according to the night shift's incident report. Nurse Jolene Vickers was adjusting medication trays when she heard a voice behind her whisper, "They sang on the day they left," and the trees sang back. When she turned, Caleb was standing upright, his arms at his sides, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. He repeated the phrase, same tone, same cadence, 7 times. Then he sat cross-legged in the center of the floor and began drawing in the dust. The pattern he etched was a spiral, nearly perfect, with 4 points intersecting the outer rim, each labeled with a name: Mercy, Elba, Ruthie, Cassian. When asked who these were, he replied with something no one on staff could explain. "They are the rests in the hymn. We're all notes, but someone must carry the silence." He said other things, fragments, never in sequence. "The youngest holds the breath. The dirt hears more than the preacher. You have to hum her name or she doesn't stay buried. The first choir didn't need mouths. They left because the house remembered how to sing." The doctors recorded all of it, transcribed it, studied the syntax, but no one could determine if he was reciting something remembered or something implanted. 3 days later, he tried to harm himself, not with violence, but with sound. He was found with 2 fingers jammed into his ears and a humming note held so long he fainted from lack of breath. His pulse remained steady during the incident. Monitors indicated that his heart began to beat in time with the note, 92 beats per minute, holding steady, as if conducted. He was placed under restricted supervision. Then came the drawings. Caleb, now using charcoal and hospital paper, began sketching structures. Always the same. A house with 7 windows, no door, and a chimney with sheet music rising from it instead of smoke. Inside the house, 12 stick figures, hands raised, eyes black. Around the house, trees with ears. One drawing showed something different. A figure outside the house, wearing a long coat, holding a baton. The caption, scrawled in blocky handwriting, "Cassian keeps time." There is no confirmed photo of this Cassian, but the name appears in other places, in the bound hymnals, in land ledgers, in one strange sermon from a 1922 chapel in Laurel County where the preacher claimed, "Cassian built the house that hums. We do not visit, we are visited." On September 4th, 1969, Caleb escaped. It shouldn't have been possible. He was under watch, the doors were locked, the security system functioned properly. But during a shift change, he was simply gone. No camera footage, no prints, no alarms. Only a faint, harmonic vibration left echoing in the vent shaft near his cell. Staff dismissed it as pipe resonance, but one nurse swore it was a G minor chord. He was never found again. Not officially. Unofficially, his name appears again. In the margin of a 1973 field report filed by a surveyor team working on electrical installation near Ridge Hollow. A handwritten note, not typed, next to a mention of an abandoned barn reads, "Saw a man watching. Coat too long, eyes too bright, humming." Beside it, CWH. 2 team members quit the job the next day. No reason given. In 1981, a photograph was submitted anonymously to the Manchester Public Library's Ghosts of Appalachia archive exhibit. It showed a silhouette standing at the tree line, arms slightly outstretched, palms upward, head tilted, blurry, indistinct. But behind the figure, 12 shapes, each kneeling, each reaching toward him. The note attached simply read, "The choir has a witness." One of the last sightings of anyone believed to be Caleb came in 1997, when a woman hiking alone near Larkspur Hollow claimed she saw a man in an old preacher's coat standing near the ruins of a foundation. She didn't approach, but she heard something, not quite humming, not quite wind, that matched what she later heard on a copy of the Appalachian Dissonant Choir fragment recording. When shown a rendering of Caleb Hollingsworth created from the hospital files, she wept and said, "He was the silence I had in my dream." All documentation of Caleb ends there. No death certificate, no grave, no fingerprints found again, just his words, echoing from sealed files and whispered accounts, always circling the same truth. He saw, he remembered, he spoke, and then he vanished. If you've ever seen someone holding silence like it was a burden, if a name like Caleb, Cassian, or Elba runs through your bloodline, if you've ever drawn houses with no doors, without knowing why, write it below, let the witness be known, and subscribe. Because the ones who see are often the ones who go next. It's one thing for a town to forget. It's another to be forced into silence. In the case of the Hollingsworth clan, memory didn't fade. It was cut, cauterized, then buried beneath paperwork, burned buildings, and bureaucratic absences. What happened in Clay County wasn't just an anomaly. It was a suppression, coordinated, intentional, and, in the end, terrifyingly successful. To understand how a family could vanish so completely, you have to follow the burn marks. The first fire was in 1963. Official reports claim it was accidental, a faulty wire in the county annex, but the building hadn't had active electricity in 5 years. The damage was surgical. The annex contained all unsealed court records from 1910 to 1955. Among them, land deeds, coroner's inquests, school expulsions, and orphanage intake logs. No backup existed. What survived was ash. Ash and one half-burned page, a roster from a 1942 school choir. 8 names are still legible, 2 are H, 1 is C. Vale. The second fire happened in 1972. The Clay County Chronicle's printing press burned overnight, and with it, every newspaper copy from the past 40 years. The fire marshal called it a freak lightning strike. The weather report shows clear skies. The Chronicle had recently published a classified ad that ran for 1 day before disappearing. To the descendants of the house with no door, your silence is our harmony. Do not let the hymn be broken. CV County officials dismissed the ad as a prank. But in the weeks following, 3 former residents came forward with disturbing recollections. A boy who remembered drawing shapes he couldn't read and being praised for hearing without ears. A woman whose grandmother hummed lullabies with no melody but made the walls itch. A pastor who'd once tried to record birdsong near Allegheny Ridge, but instead captured layered voices in harmony, despite being alone. Each of these individuals rescinded their statements within days. Each gave no reason. One moved out of state. One died in a car accident. The pastor resigned from his church and left no forwarding address. His last sermon, written by hand and never delivered, ends with the line, "There is a choir beneath the town. We are only its stage." But the suppression didn't rely on fire alone. Internal memos from the Clay County Sheriff's Office, declassified only through the Freedom of Information Act, reveal a string of routine dismissals. These include the following directives: 1965. Do not pursue investigation into Harmony Ridge remains. Advise family contact if approached. No press statement. 1968. Visitors to the Chapel House site should be discouraged. Post signage about unstable ground. File as erosion risk. 1971. Inquiries about Caleb Hollingsworth should be rerouted to Preston State. No public comment. 1974. Any music-related complaints in the Hollow region should be logged as wildlife disturbance. Close reports in 48 hours. Sheriff Everett Glynn, who oversaw the initial discovery of the remains, retired early in 1969. He never gave interviews. His personal journal, partially leaked in 1987, includes a final entry dated April 11, 1969. It's not what we saw. It's what we almost heard. The boys who went in first still hum in their sleep. One carved a note into his desk, said it came from the dirt. We didn't bury them because they were dead. We buried them because they were still singing. Glynn died of a stroke 2 years later. His wife claimed he refused to sleep in silence, always had a fan on, or the radio, or static. The suppression extended to the clergy. Reverend Paul Teague of Manchester Baptist Church gave a sermon in 1970 titled "The Hollow of Echoes." He spoke briefly of a faith unclean and warned his congregation against songs that beg the earth to open. Within the month, he retracted his statements and stepped down. His resignation letter ends, "You cannot shepherd when the flock is underground." His replacement, a younger pastor named Eli Rourke, sealed the church's original hymnals and replaced them with new volumes. All missing pages 13, 22, and 44. When asked why, he said, 13 was sung in silence, 22 never needed a voice, and 44 was heard once and never again. Efforts to publish investigations into the Hollingsworth family repeatedly failed. In 1985, journalist Nell Kersey submitted a full-length exposé to the Appalachian Gazette, titled "The Choir with No Witness." The piece included interviews, photographs of strange carvings on tree trunks near Larkspur Hollow, and a transcribed confession from a woman claiming to be a surviving Hollingsworth. The story was pulled within hours of submission. The editor, James Harner, later told a colleague, "It felt like holding sound, like the paper hummed." Kersey's files were destroyed in a break-in days later. Nothing else was stolen. Her byline never appeared again. There's one more fire. In 1993, the Hollingsworth Chapel home, what was left of it, burned. No one had visited in decades. Its roof had collapsed, its floorboards long gone. But one night, a hiker reported seeing a flicker in the tree line. Not flame, light. As if something was moving in a spiral pattern, glowing faintly. By the time officials arrived, all that remained were scorched stones and a heat that didn't match the surrounding air. No accelerants, no weather event. Just ash. And one object left untouched. A glass jar filled with what appeared to be beeswax and paper. Inside, 12 names, all first names, all from previous school rosters. Some believed dead, some forgotten. One was Ruthie. One was Cassian. This jar now resides in a private collection. Not a museum, not a university. A collector who refuses to be named purchased it from a former deputy in 1995. When contacted for this video, the collector responded with a 3-word email: "The harmony holds." Today, Clay County has no official record of the Hollingsworth family. No graves, no census listings, no living relatives. But the suppression wasn't just paperwork. It was atmospheric, cultural, spiritual. It seeped into the soil, the song, the throat of the town, and whether by fear, reverence, or something stranger, the silence held. Until now. It's gone now, at least in the physical sense. What remains is a scar in the terrain, a patch of land that won't grow green, a dip in the ridge line where birds refuse to land. But for years, the Hollingsworth house stood tall atop Allegheny Ridge. Not majestic, not inviting, just wrong. Those who saw it up close never forgot the feeling. You don't forget a structure that hums back at you when you breathe. The original structure was built sometime in the early 1900s, though no construction permits exist. An oral history collected by the Clay County Historical Project in 1958 records an account from Elmer Bales, a logger, who remembered hauling whitewood beams up the ridge by mule in 1913. He said the trees they cut bled thick sap the color of rust. When asked why the wood was never sold again from that grove, he simply said, "The saws squealed wrong." Locals began referring to the place as the Chapel House, a hybrid structure, part dwelling, part sanctuary, and entirely inaccessible unless you knew the path. Ridge Hollow Trail bent away from it, literally. Old aerial maps show the trail veering toward the house before curving in a perfect semicircle away, as if the land itself thought better of getting too close. Visitors were rare, but they existed. The most infamous account came from a 1987 trespassing report filed by a group of college students from Lexington. They had heard rumors of the house that listens and decided to document their exploration for a university folklore project. Only one came back. That student, Evelyn Rhodes, gave a recorded statement to the Clay County Sheriff's Office on October 23, 1987. Her voice is calm, unshaken, but there are long pauses, like she's listening between her own words. We approached at dusk. The house looked smaller than we expected, but taller somehow, like it extended downward, not upward. The door was unlocked. Inside, it smelled like wax and copper. The floor creaked in rhythm. Every step echoed twice, once from our feet, once from somewhere deeper. She pauses. We found chairs arranged in a circle. Each had a stone on the seat, wrapped in fabric with music notes stitched in red thread. No instruments, no furniture, just the chairs. And the silence. It wasn't empty. It was held, like something was choosing not to speak. When asked about the others, she simply said, "They stayed." They sat in the chairs. They started humming. I didn't. I ran. No charges were filed. The case was marked unresolved, no crime. Evelyn disappeared 5 years later on a solo hiking trip near Berea. Her body was never found, but her recorder was recovered in 1994, buried beneath a pile of stone cairns near a dry creek bed. It contained 6 minutes of tape, most of it static, except for one moment where a faint chord plays. Minor, sustained, with what sounds like a second voice humming beneath it. The house remained mostly untouched until 1999, when a documentary crew attempted to locate its remains. They found the foundation, a perfect square of scorched stone, and several wooden posts that had not rotted. But the true anomaly came from the air itself. According to their logs, the sound equipment malfunctioned the moment they stepped onto the foundation. Boom mics picked up no wind, no insect noise, no environmental ambience, just silence. One technician, Ren Holloway, later claimed it wasn't that there was no sound. It was that sound wouldn't stay, like it got erased the moment it left your mouth. The team abandoned the chute. Their footage was corrupted. Their logbook entries are preserved in the Kentucky Folklore Society archives, labeled under the harmonic blind spot. But the most disturbing account came in 2006. That year, a local man named Jonah Greaves, age 42, claimed he spent a night near the ruins while hunting. He built a fire just outside the old property line and laid down to sleep. What happened next is recorded in a handwritten statement he left on the porch of the Clay County Library 2 days later. "I dreamt I was inside the house again. Not in the past, but in a now that didn't belong to me. The walls breathed, not in and out, just closer. I heard singing, but not with voices, with shape, like the corners of the room were folding around the sound." He woke up unable to speak for nearly 6 hours. When he did regain his voice, the first words out of his mouth were, I heard them remembering. Jonah refused to return to the ridge. He died in 2011, cause listed as cardiac arrest, but his autopsy revealed a hardened growth in his inner ear canal, resembling calcium buildup in the shape of a tuning fork. That same year, a group of amateur paranormal investigators visited the site under the name Silent Appalachia. They live-streamed their exploration for an audience of 437 viewers. The video feed cut out precisely 10 minutes into the broadcast. When it resumed, the group was gone. Their car was still on the trail. Equipment scattered. All three were found 2 days later wandering barefoot near Larkspur Hollow, humming the same 4-note progression. They've never spoken publicly about the incident. So what was it about the house? It was never opulent. No stained glass, no altar, just walls, lined with shelves holding stones, folded cloths, and glass jars with curled paper inside. Each jar labeled with a number. No names, just integers, written backward. Some say the house itself was a living thing, a structure designed to remember, built not to shelter people, but to record them, not by voice, not by image, but by frequency. In 2012, a geological survey was conducted in the area for unrelated mining prospects. The seismic readings showed that the soil directly beneath the house foundation vibrated at 8.5 Hz, below the human range of hearing, but within the frequency known to induce unease, visual hallucinations, and disorientation. One geologist described it as, "The ground under that spot is still ringing. Like a bell someone struck 100 years ago." The house was demolished or decayed in the late 90s. But to this day, hikers report strange sensations near the ridge. Feelings of pressure in the ears, dreams of circular rooms, and, more often than not, music with no source. There are no official plans to rebuild or memorialize the site. The Clay County Development Board lists the ridge as inaccessible. And yet, the air still hums. The deeper you dig into the story of the Hollingsworth clan, the more the soil begins to shift under your feet. At first, it seems like one isolated horror, a family that sang its way into disappearance. But horror doesn't stay put in Appalachia. It drifts, it echoes. It leaves impressions on other names, in other hollers, in the stories elders swear never happened, and then whisper to their grandchildren when the storms roll in. Because the truth is, the Hollingsworths weren't the only ones. Begin in Boone County, 1898, with the Vixens of Willow Hollow. An all-women's prayer group documented in parish ledgers as the Choir Mothers. They conducted sunrise services in a clearing where no church ever stood. Local records describe them as gifted with harmony and shrouded in abstinence. No photos survive, but one pamphlet contains an illustration. 12 women seated in a ring, hands folded, mouths shut, each with a strand of thread drawn from ear to ear. They vanished in October of that year. Their belongings were found placed precisely in a circle, with a stone in the center reading only, "We sang enough." Or take the Braithwaite Choir fire of 1933 in Bell County. The fire destroyed a one-room schoolhouse during an after-hours music rehearsal. The official explanation was faulty kerosene storage. But the surviving teacher, Miss Flora Lemming, described the music before the flames as not children's voices, something older pretending to be young. Lemming was later institutionalized after she wrote a letter claiming she still heard the song in her sleep, and that her pupils had returned. She insisted, until her death in 1946, that the children never screamed. They sang. The pattern doesn't just span years, it spans names. In Clay, Harlan, Preston, and Jackson counties, old school rosters list recurring surnames: Hollingsworth, Ellery, Vexley, Dunmore, Vale, all tied to remote homesteads, all with spotty attendance, and all marked by marginal notes in the attendance books, hums instead of reading, eyes closed during pledge, refuses to sing in groups but mimics songs back later, perfectly. These weren't behavioral issues. They were echoes. In Laurel County, 1951, a census taker reported visiting a small dwelling near Benner's Hollow. Inside, a family of 4 sat silently in the kitchen, not moving, not blinking. The child, age approximately 7, was humming under his breath. The man offered no information. The woman held a folded piece of music against her chest. The census taker left the form blank. His handwritten margin note simply said, "Same layout as Ridge family." And in Knott County, the Vexley family owned land that bordered a stream where no frogs sang. Local lore held that the Vexley children could hear thunder before God made it. In 1961, an entire Vexley household was declared missing after neighbors reported strange choruses carried by the wind. The search yielded no remains, but inside the house, 12 chairs were found, positioned in a circle. Each chair had a stone beneath it, each stone carved with a note from the solfège scale. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, re, mi, fa, so. 12 chairs, 12 tones. No people. The records for the Vexleys were sealed shortly after, for religious privacy. In 1978, a linguist named Dr. Calvin Adderley attempted to map regional dialects of remote Appalachian sects. He began collecting hymns and found something chilling. He called it the folded scale, a pattern of harmonics that defied musical convention, half tones where whole tones should be, backward phrasing, and chords that only resolved if you stopped singing. It wasn't a musical tradition, it was a design, a ritual built into melody. And he found it in 3 families, Hollingsworth, Vexley, and Cassian. Adderley published a paper titled Silence in the Shape of Sound. Within a year, he was fired from his university. His notes disappeared from the archive. He died 2 years later, reportedly of a seizure brought on by tonal exposure. His wife claimed he went deaf 3 months before his death. Not medically, just functionally. He said sound had gotten too big, she told a journalist, like it was swallowing him. Fast forward to 2004, when a music teacher in Leslie County turned in a child's journal to the school counselor. The journal contained drawings of a house without doors, a family kneeling around a stone, and the phrase, "She hums when the dirt gets close." The child's last name was Vale. He was transferred to a private school the following year. The teacher was fired. The local newspaper never covered the incident. What do these families have in common? They live, or lived, on land no one wants to buy. Their homes are never on main roads. They always build in circles. They rarely attend church. And they sing, not in celebration, but in synchrony. Not to express faith, but to hold something steady. In a sealed report from a 1984 child welfare case, later leaked by a whistleblower, an investigator describes walking into a household and hearing perfect pitch in dish clinking, in footsteps, even in the dog's bark, as if the entire home was tuned to a single frequency. The family refused to answer questions, but the father allegedly whispered one thing before the door closed. "We aren't a family, we're a chord." So it wasn't just the Hollingsworths, it was a pattern. A composition written across generations and counties. A score passed hand to hand, not in ink, but in sound. Some even speculate that the name Cassian isn't a person, but a position. A conductor, the keeper of tempo. His name appears in funeral registries, land deeds, and choir rosters decades apart. Never aging, always legible, and always in the same handwriting. In one 1939 burial book from Harlan County, the line for efficient reads simply, Cassian V. The next entry is blank. Whoever, or whatever, he was, he kept time. And he wasn't exclusive to the Hollingsworths. A recovered cassette tape from 1992, submitted anonymously to a Kentucky folk archive, contains 4 minutes of layered humming. The tape ends with a female voice saying, "It's not one family. It's a song sung by blood, and we've only heard the first verse." The tape was labeled Field Recording Number 13, Ellery/Vexley Compound. Not for replay. It has since been lost. You can silence a song, but only for a while. Sooner or later, the melody finds its way back. It seeps through the floorboards of memory, slips into the breath between generations, and waits for a voice young enough, or forgotten enough, to sing it again. The Hollingsworth story should have ended in ash, in burial, in sealed files and scorched timber. But it didn't, because it's returning. And this time, it's in the hands of children. In 2021, a third-grade teacher at Leslie County Elementary noticed something strange. Her student, Maisie Lynn, age 9, had turned in a drawing during a quiet time exercise. It showed a building, a chapel of sorts, but with no windows, no doors, no bell, no cross. Just a roof rising out of earth and 12 figures kneeling around it, arms raised to the sky. Inside the building, mouths floated in mid-air, open, singing. She asked Maisie about the drawing. The girl said it was something she'd seen in a dream. She called it the place that waits. Her parents were contacted. They were confused, claimed they'd never exposed her to anything remotely religious or supernatural. But when they were shown the drawing, the mother went pale. She recognized the building. Her grandmother had warned her about it when she was a child growing up in Clay County. She called it the church that didn't let you leave. That same year, Facebook parenting groups in Knott and Bell counties began exchanging stories, quietly and in private, about their children hearing songs with no words. One mother claimed her son began humming a 4-note phrase repeatedly, usually when alone in his room. When she recorded it and played it for her grandfather, he dropped the glass in his hand, said it was the same hum we were told to stay inside for during winters near Larkspur Hollow. Another child, age 7, was caught burying stones in the backyard. Each had a crude musical note carved into it. When asked what he was doing, he replied, "Building a song under the dirt so they can hear us again." In 2022, a viral Reddit thread titled, "What's Up with These Kids and Doorless Churches?" caught the attention of regional folklorists. Dozens of users from rural Kentucky, West Virginia, and eastern Tennessee posted photos of their children's drawings, most depicting circular buildings with no entrances, stone circles, or children holding hands around trees with open mouths drawn in, the bark. Many parents reported no known influence or media exposure that could have inspired these images. One particularly haunting post came from user at Macabre, who described her 10-year-old daughter's sleep-talking. She claimed the girl whispered phrases like, "The melody will find the last breath," and "He'll count to 12, and the 13th will hum us home." The child had never been to church. Her family had no musical background. Yet when taken for a checkup, her pediatrician noted that her resting heartbeat came in perfect 6/8 rhythm. In a quiet neighborhood in Madison County, a child therapist began noticing patterns among her young clients. Unrelated children who each had recurring dreams of standing in a room with people who didn't blink. The room always had no doors, no lights, only a humming, steady and slow, that came from beneath the floor. When asked how they felt in the dream, most answered, "Still." One child even added, "If I don't hum back, the floor gets closer." These were not isolated events. In May 2023, a substitute teacher in Breathitt County was terminated after she attempted to lead a protection prayer during class. She claimed that her students were swaying without realizing it during free reading time, and that one child sang in 2 voices at once. When she asked where they learned the melody, the child pointed to the wall and said, "They practice behind there when we're quiet." An investigation followed. No charges were filed, but the substitute left the state. And perhaps most disturbing of all, in June 2023, the Clay County Sheriff's Office received a 3:14 a.m. 911 call from an elderly woman named Hilda Renner. She claimed a child had wandered into her home, barefoot, humming. She described him as about 8 years old, with gray eyes and a pale mouth. He wouldn't speak, just hummed. The dispatcher stayed on the line while deputies were sent. 17 minutes later, the call dropped. When officers arrived, the house was empty. No signs of forced entry, no child found, but on the kitchen table was a folded note, handwritten in blocky, childlike letters. "Do you hear us yet?" The house's electricity had shorted out at exactly 3:14 a.m. The breaker box was undamaged. The following week, the sheriff's office received 3 separate anonymous voicemails, each with the same background hum, each containing a child's voice reciting slowly, "We are the choir without mouths. We've returned for the chorus." These aren't just children playing. These are echoes. They speak in fragments. They hum notes no one teaches. They draw structures they've never seen, but that generations before them feared. They bury stones, recite cadences, and speak of Cassian like he's still keeping time. And sometimes they draw themselves with mouths stitched shut and eyes open wide. Even now, in genealogy groups and quiet church meetings, whispers circulate that this is more than a resurgence. It's a retrieval, that the rituals never ended. They just needed new voices, smaller lungs, innocent breath. Because silence, too, is generational. And eventually, someone opens their throat without knowing what they're inviting in. A field researcher conducting a private survey in 2023 found an abandoned treehouse near Ridge Hollow. Inside were crumpled sheets of paper, children's homework, charcoal drawings, snack wrappers, and one page with musical notation. The notes formed a descending scale, ending in an unnatural clef that matched sketches from the original canticle of the Hollow Choir. At the bottom of the page, written in a red crayon, "We're just learning the old songs. It's not just that the children are remembering, it's that something is remembering through them. You can bury a body, you can burn a house, you can seal a file. But a name? A name, if written often enough, and in the right hands, survives." The story of the Hollingsworth clan has always circled a name like a drain. Cassian Vale. Not a relative, not a neighbor, not a preacher on the registry. Yet his name lingers, in margins, in hymnals, in property ledgers, and on tongues that still won't say it twice. And wherever that name appears, something sings. The earliest known appearance of Cassian Vale is in an 1897 deed for a parcel of land near Larkspur Hollow. The signature is clean, looping, slightly ornamental, and matches, identically, the signature found on a land transfer form dated 1974, nearly 80 years later. Same hand, same ink pressure, same initials. No record of the man's birth, no death certificate, no census trace. But the signature, that kept showing up. In 1911, a church newsletter from Preston County included a brief thank you note to Brother C.V. for his sacred arrangements in the matter of the children's vocal discipline. No explanation, no further mention. The next page contains a hymn titled Harmony for the Hollowing. The first line reads, "Let those without breath carry the rest." In 1939, a funeral guest ledger for a girl named Elba Ruth Hollingsworth includes the name Cassian Vale. The funeral was private. The minister's name is redacted in archived records. Yet someone signed in a steady hand near the bottom of the page. The line reads, "Witnessed, not buried. Cassian Vale." What kind of man writes that at a child's funeral? Fast forward to 1955. A choir roster from a small church near Ridge Hollow includes a Vale Cassian in the bass section. No address, no emergency contact. He never missed a rehearsal. After 6 months, the choir director went deaf in one ear. She later wrote in her journal that Cassian sang in perfect pitch, but only when no one else was. "He sang the silence between our notes," she wrote, "and it made the sound feel heavier." Then there's the 1971 psychiatric intake form from Preston State Hospital. The patient listed as Caleb Hollingsworth was recorded murmuring various names in a loop during his episodes. Most were indecipherable, but 2 stood out, repeated 12 times in succession. Cassian Vale, Cassian Vale. His pulse dropped when he said it. EEGs recorded a pattern in his brainwaves that mirrored those seen in trained choral singers during deep vocal entrainment. The doctors dismissed it as coincidence. The nurse who recorded the readings resigned a week later, but it doesn't stop there. Property records from 1993 show a Cassian V purchasing a sliver of land just 5 miles from where the Hollingsworth house once stood. The signature? Identical to the 1897 deed. The name on the filing? Caretaker. He never built on the land, never registered a structure. But hikers in the area report a structure that isn't visible on maps, a building that only appears on fog-heavy mornings, and only if you don't look directly at it. In 2014, a high school music teacher in Laurel County hosted a regional choral workshop. One of the pieces performed, anonymously submitted, was titled Echo Without End. The composition was minimalist, 4 parts, unsettling intervals, no lyrics, just breath sounds and held tones. The piece was credited to Vale C. When asked who submitted it, no one knew. Students reported nausea during the performance. One girl claimed she saw the ceiling pull downward as they sang. The sheet music was misplaced after the event. The school files listed as unrecoverable. A search through microfiche archives reveals a pattern. Whenever strange humming, child disappearances, or unexplainable mass silences occurred, Cassian Vale appeared. Not always in person, sometimes in notes, sometimes in lists, sometimes in song credits. Always nearby, never accountable. His name shows up in a 2009 community board meeting attendance sheet, handwritten, tucked into the minutes like an afterthought. The topic of the meeting? Unexplained choral disturbances during lightning storms. One resident asked if the sounds could be wind through the ridge. Another answered, "The wind doesn't count to 12 before it starts." Even Reddit, that strange vault of the modern campfire, has whispers. An anonymous post from 2018 describes a man visiting Appalachian churches, sitting in the back row, never speaking, always leaving right before the final hymn. The post claims the man smiled when children sang off key, as if they got closer that way. His name, according to the usher, was Cassian V. He left no phone number. All this raises one question. Is Cassian Vale a man or a role? A person or an instrument? Because the handwriting never changes. The phrases repeat. The signature, always steady, always unaged. Could Cassian Vale be a conductor? Not of choirs, but of memory, of ritual, of recurrence. The old hymnal recovered from the Hollingsworth chapel lists Cassian Vale under the dedication line, not as the composer, not even as the author, but as the one who keeps time. And that's what's most disturbing, because in music, the one who keeps time doesn't stop the melody. He ensures it continues. Even now, county land ledgers list abandoned properties under the name Vale, Cassian. The most recent dated April 2022, for a half-acre plot near Benner's Hollow. No dwelling exists, just a dirt patch, but the air there, measured, tense, like a held breath waiting to be exhaled in perfect unison. A genealogist tracing the Vale name through Kentucky, Tennessee, and West Virginia came to a chilling conclusion. There is no Vale lineage, no family tree, just a series of entries, all single, no parents, no children, no spouses, just the name, written again and again and again in different hands, but always the same hand. Some believe he was never born, that he emerged from the silence, that he is silence, personified, embodied, moving through generations not to harm, but to harmonize. To keep the ritual intact, to remind the bloodlines when to hum, when to pause, when to hold the final note. Because in a choir, not everyone sings melody. Someone must carry the drone beneath, the unending humming note that holds everything in place. And that is what Cassian Vale does. Not all rituals are meant for resurrection. Some are meant to stay sealed, not out of fear, but out of respect for what silence is keeping still. And yet, every generation has one who tries to open the hymn again, who finds the notes buried beneath timber and moss, who hums where they were told not to, and who walks into the pattern thinking they can leave. That's what happened in the final known gathering of the song. It's not marked on any calendar. No photographs, no confirmed participants. But in a private diary discovered in 1994, belonging to missionary Eula Jane Collins, who once visited the Hollingsworth household in 1940, there's an entry dated October 12, 1965, just over 2 months after the skeletal remains were discovered. The ink is shaky, the paper warped from moisture, but the entry remains legible. They called it an ordination, but no one wore robes. No scripture was read. The children stood in a circle, hands bound by thread soaked in beeswax. The mother hummed. The father counted. The boy in the center, they said his name was Cassian, did not move, did not blink. He opened his mouth. No sound came, but the floor sank. They gave him the silence, and he gave it shape. The diary ends there. That was her last entry. Collins died 4 days later. Heart failure. Her body was discovered by a neighbor who claimed the air in her home smelled like old hymnals and melted iron. The cause of death was never questioned, but her body was buried without a headstone. Family orders. Since that day, whispers have passed down through certain Appalachian communities, not about what the Hollingsworths did, but what they made. Because ordination isn't always the appointment of a priest. Sometimes it's the creation of a vessel. A 1973 field report from anthropologist Lorraine Bishop includes the following transcript from an anonymous elder in Preston County. It weren't no religion, weren't no sermon. They took the boy and tuned him, like a fork. You ever see someone tune, son? You don't forget the sound. It don't ring in your ear, it rings behind your teeth. She described the ritual as the final humming, a moment when the entire family exhaled at once, and the child in the center began to glow. Not metaphorically, physically. The air shimmered. The shadows around him folded in, and when it was over, they were all facing him, kneeling, smiling. He didn't speak, she said, didn't need to. He held the melody now. Whether this Cassian was the same as the Cassian Vale, whose name echoed across property ledgers and choir rosters, is impossible to confirm. But what's clear is this: someone was ordained to carry the song forward, and the others, they went quiet. It wasn't a disappearance. It was a submission, a chosen silence, orchestrated, arranged, and sealed with breath. From that point forward, reports of group humming faded. The house fell, the names vanished from rosters. But the name Cassian Vale grew more frequent. He began to appear alone, a conductor without a choir, a voice without a throat. The ordination was never spoken of again. But something strange happens with stories like this. They don't vanish, they adapt. They find cracks in the walls of forgetting and slip through, humming softly. They show up in dreams, in symbols, in children's drawings, and in the sudden, inexplicable knowing that there's a song no one taught you, but you still remember. In 2020, a YouTube video with only ambient tones and static went briefly viral among paranormal forums. It contained no tags, no description, just a single visual, a candle in the middle of a stone ring. The flame never flickered, but viewers reported a soft pressure behind their eyes and a sensation of being counted. At the 12:44 mark, a voice whispered, "The silence has chosen a new breath." The video was removed within a week, the account deleted, but the comments, those that remain archived, include chilling phrases. "I know this song. My grandmother hummed this when she thought we were asleep. The last note matches the hum from the hill behind my old house. I didn't hear anything, but now I can't stop humming." These are not coincidences. They are recurrences, reverberations from an ordination that should never have been repeated. Because the act of creating a keeper of silence a living hymn, doesn't just echo forward. It amplifies. It finds new ears, new lungs, new children who draw, churches with no doors, new teachers who find old names in their rosters, new woods where birds go quiet, new towns where the roads bend just a little too far around a ridge that shouldn't be there. We call it horror, but to those who sang it, it was harmony. And now it's humming again. Some say there's another ordination coming, that 12 voices are already being taught, that stones are being carved, that the silence is finding its shape once more, in places where no hymn should live. That's why this story was told. Not to frighten, to warn, because the worst part of the Hollingsworth tale isn't what they did. It's what we let disappear, and what's now coming back, not as history, but as rehearsal. If your family ever whispered a name they refused to explain, if you've ever walked past a chapel you never remembered building and felt like you were being timed, if you've ever stood in a circle without knowing why and felt the need to breathe with others, write it, seal it, let the archive hold it, and subscribe. Because when the silence returns, it always looks for someone listening.